The next speaker before lunch, we'll have one talk before lunch, is Mr. Sinderby, and his topic is cerebral signaling for feedback in mechanical ventilation.
So anyway, so first of all, it's well, first it's an honor to, after this lineup of speakers, it's a real honor, and I guess Jennifer and I have the rest of the day to ourselves now, so now we can have some fun. We're going to talk about new technologies, and I have to be good too because my boss is sitting over here, so we are like watched even from home in Toronto. So anyway, here we go. So the topic I got is, can cerebral signaling be utilized for feedback in mechanical ventilation? And well, we don't know. This is my kids, one of my kids' favorite shows. And the thing is, we are going where no one has been before, that's for sure. We don't know, we have no clue. We have data, we have research, we have a lot of experience in this. So I'm going to show you later a little bit of history of how this came about, but we are up for something new, and I think what's really important here is to see, like, as a sponsor seminar like this, is that how industry, how you professionals and we researchers can kind of interact and collaborate and try to make something that becomes better. And we are at the start of it right now. So, to give you a little bit of an illustration of where we are trying to go with this is, I think we are lacking information. I mean, if you see this, I mean, I would tell you are in Toronto, correct? This is Toronto. That's our tower, isn't it, Art? Or did I miss it? Sorry, okay. Try this one. Where are we now? You see the landmark, you see the church down there at the bottom of the street? So where are we? That's where we are. This is in France too. But nobody ever saw this church before, I think. Anyway, I didn't fake the sign, it's there, okay?
The safe part of France.
Now, you can't trust signs though. You see the upper signs there? Well, 2 ways to the same place. Anyway, new technology. The car we had a GPS system. That's neat. The car we have at home too has a GPS system. If they steal my car, I can call the company to tell me where the thieves are with my car. Like, this is new technology. It tells us where we are in time and so on. It makes things easier for us. Brings information back and helps us to make decisions that are better. Now, what we alluded to, I think, all this morning is against, do we know how much assist to deliver to during mechanical ventilation, and especially, is one level of assist enough? Is that really all we need? Just give the patient one level and you're set. Well, try this. This is since 1876. We didn't use one level assist at that time. The only problem was just that the patient's head is put in the wrong end of the ventilator. It would be easier if the guy could talk to the guy and say, is this okay, or should you need more, or should you need less? Now, this is a patient from an ICU setting. I don't know what patient it is, but you can look at this. You can probably see that this is volume control. Now, is this patient breathing or not? And if one says that he is breathing, put your hand up. Anybody who says he is not breathing, put your hand up. So, he's not breathing. But you can see that there are some small efforts here, and this is volume control, and the patient is, as Rolf said, the patient is synchronized to the ventilator. It's not the ventilator synchronized to the patient. Now, same patient again. This is about half an hour later. Is he breathing? The settings are the same. Can you tell if he's breathing? Those who think he's breathing, put your hand up. Okay, now we got some says he's breathing. And yes, you're right. He is breathing. He's breathing quite a lot. He's actually outsucking the ventilator. He's not getting enough. Same mode, 2 time points in time. One case is respiratory arrest. At the other point, he's actually under-assisted. Now, how do we assist to put the ventilator? So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in time here. This is Nava. So, is he breathing now? Well, he has to be because the mode forces him to breathe. So yes, he is. But if you look at one thing, which is the interesting part, is the volume tracing. You see how much variability you have in volume? He doesn't want one volume. He likes to vary his volume. And you never take 2 breaths that are identical. You don't. And you never use 2 pressures identical in a row either. This is not how we breathe. But the waveforms that you see here look messy compared to the beautiful ones I showed you in the first slide. So how does assist or mechanical ventilation work then? Well, I mean, I think we can divide it into, if I can get my thing here, yeah. I think we can divide it into different things. First of all, we have asynchronous ventilation. That means the ventilator is doing something and you are doing something else. That means that you're partly ventilated when you want it and partly ventilated when you don't want it. And as Rolf says, this has an effect of CO2. Then we have agitation sedation. You know, you're upset and you get upset, you get sedated, now you get calm. This goes up and down all the time. And then we have this synchronous assist ventilation. When I say assist ventilation, that means that now you are actually assisting the inspiration and you're not pushing during the exhalation. You are really just giving help. So this is like when you try to open a door and it's heavy. I mean, it's good if the guy on the other side pulls when you push. Otherwise, it wouldn't do any good. So that is what I think is in the case unloading. However, if we take the concept of unloading, all these things can unload a patient, but it goes down at two different limbs. So if we take this way down, well, we can either hyperventilate the patient or we can sedate him and we get him to stop breathing. And that is suppression of respiratory drive, but it is also unloading. If you watch the pressures that the patient is generating, if you watch the diaphragm activity, you will see that the patient is working less. So he is unloaded. But you're not assisting him, you're ventilating him or sedating him. If we go down this limb, now you have synchronized ventilation. So what are you doing now? Well, now you're actually helping him only when he asks for it. Now, what does that do? Well, this gives him the opportunity to control the CO2 level. This gives him the opportunity to control his tidal volume, and a lot of things comes much easier to the patient. But of course, also, as Rolf says, how does the patient know that he's doing the right thing? And that still remains a mystery. Now, to give you a little bit of the background of this technology, I thought I would share that with you. This mode started many years ago, and as pioneers, this is the first Nava setup. You see here, this is a brilliant machine, and we had amplifiers all over the place, and I don't even show you the computers we're using because I think that the picture would be too wide here. Anyway, that's like 95. 5 years later, we had come up to something we could actually use in patients. So that's like the stretch we had to go. And today, thanks to things, all these computers, everything we have had, like in the past, lots of toys, is now packaged into one little box, and that's the beauty of new technology. You can really put a lot of things and a lot of intelligence into a ventilator. In this case, you're not putting the intelligence in. I think it's a system, it's like the GPS system. The system takes a signal that we couldn't handle, and it makes it usable, and now we can use it for something good. But again, it's the patient who controls the ventilator. It's not that catheter I'm going to show you. It's not this box that I show you here that does that. It's really the patient who is in control. Same thing for catheters. This is two catheters. The upper one you see is the old-fashioned ones that we used to use in '93 and before. If you make that one on a 16 French tube and put it through your nose, there will be a big bleeding. So, since we're using nasogastric tubes as our vehicle to obtain the signals, we came up with another little more smooth. This is just like it's the thickness of my hair, actually. I'm going to show you another slide later. And this little wire that goes just around here is enough of a sensor. We didn't know that in '93, but in 2003 we knew that. So, why then should we go for neurally adjusted ventilatory assist? Why should we let the patient control? Why should we do all this? Well, this slide is going to be showing you, start again, if I click here. Here you see the little blink up there at the top. That's the brain starting a signal, and now you can see the phrenic nerve activity as it proceeds down the phrenic nerves. It's going to reach the diaphragm, and here you see like an electrical field kind of moving over the diaphragm. This then gives a contraction of diaphragm, the chest wall is expanding, and finally we get inspiratory flow. There's a lot of steps from start of a breath to the end, to the start of the inspiratory flow. And also there's a lot of feedback into this system. You have receptors at each level that will tell you you shouldn't take the breath as deep, or no, you have to breathe in more, you should breathe faster, you should be slow, breathe slower. So here's a lot of information. If we go on, sorry. again. Yes. So the signal that we're taking out looks like this. This is an old paper from Lourenco. It's an excellent paper. And what you see here at the bottom is the diaphragm activity on the left side. That's the diaphragm activity. That's what it looks like. Stochastic signal, more like noise than anything. Above it is the phrenic nerve activity. And on the top you see tidal volume. The nice part of this graph is that it shows actually as close to the brain as you can measure, that the diaphragm activity is actually representing both your breathing effort because it ends up in the tidal volume. And you can see on the right side graph that the diaphragm activity, as it increases, as you see on the y-axis, the phrenic nerve activity increases too. There is a proportionality between these signals. So you can trust that when you see diaphragm activity, this signal comes from your brain. But it could come because you decide to take a deep breath. It could come because you have to take a deep breath. Like, it could be because you're just breathing now. Do you think about that you're breathing? So how many breaths did you take in the last 60 seconds? Any answer? You don't know that you're breathing, but you're doing it anyway. So therefore, we start like in the complex model there where we have the central nervous system at the top of the food chain. And then we go through the phrenic nerve activity, the diaphragm excitation, the diaphragm contraction, chest wall and lung expansion, and finally airway pressure, flow, and volume. And that's where we measure today. If we have like a bit better, we would be up at the brain. We would take the ideal technology, which is the central nervous system. I mean, that would be ideal. You just plug into the brain. Unfortunately, we're still looking for the plug. Going to the diaphragm level, we can actually take out this signal. And the beautiful thing for the ICU is we can actually take it out from your patients because you put tubes into your patients that pass the diaphragm. And that's an excellent thing to use. So, come back to the thing, why use NAVA? Well, if you look on this slide, you see on the upper, on this panel here, a healthy subject breathing half a liter, tidal volume. He is breathing to a pneumotach, so he is aware of his breathing. He's not like you are breathing now. But the diaphragm activity that we can measure in this person is approximately 5 to 10% of the maximum activity he can voluntarily generate. And we did a lot of work to see if this voluntary maximal is really true, and it's okay. It's not perfect, but in patients and healthy subjects who are awake, you can get them to do these maneuvers and you can get fairly decent values. If they're sedated, forget it. Now, COPD patient, living at home, PCO2 of say 45, 46, still using half a liter tidal volume. You see he's breathing faster, but look at the diaphragm activity, 5, 6, 7 times higher. This guy is probably aware of every breath he takes. If you go to a patient with polio or prior polio, you have the same situation, restricted disease, but still the same outcome. Now, when you come to the point that you can no longer breathe at home, you have to have a machine to help you breathe. Where do you think the activity is then? I don't know. We can't get the maximum values out of these guys, so we can't really look. So, why we want you to use NAVA is therefore like, we believe that we have a system here who adapts very nicely. So when you get sick, the activity goes up, and you start to use your muscles more, but we pick up that signal. What happens with flow and volume? Well, as you get sick, flow and volume goes down. That's the problem. This is what you can't get out of the patient. Now you're using the weakest signal you have as your controller signal. Well, we try to go up the level and take the signal from the top of the food chain instead and say, here we see the guy is really trying hard, as you saw in the COPD patient or the polio patient, and we're going to help him. So for us is the sicker he gets, the stronger the controller signal. But if you sedate him, we lose it. So back to the catheter. This is our vehicle. I think this is what the whole technology is based upon. And on the left side, you see a nasogastric feeding tube that we use for our research. And it has some balloons on it to measure pressures. That's for purely research purposes. And on the right side, you see a blow-up of that electrode. And you can see also my hair. Since it turned gray, it had to be stained red in order to be visible on this screen there, but it's actually a hair next to it. So you can pass this catheter through the nose of a patient without kind of doing any damage to the mucosa or anything. And this is your standard feeding tube. And remember one thing, it doesn't measure movement, it doesn't measure anything but electrical activity of a muscle. So how do we put the catheter in? Well, this usual thing you do in every patient, you measure the distance, put in the feeding tube. I will show you in the next. Here you go. The catheter has a little slippery surface on it that you have to activate by dipping it in water, and that's what you always see today, like in the, what's it called, in other catheters. And you see here, we put the catheter in and we position it so that the electrode array that we are going to use is positioned at the level of the diaphragm. Here you get the standard little puff of air that you usually do. You listen to the stomach and you hear a little popping sound, and you can say the catheter is in place. Now, let me see here. Did I pass something here? So, to assemble the system, we have to slide in our little box here. This is a little prototype thing we have. And you connect the patient to the ventilator. So this is our setup. So you have a signal coming from the diaphragm, going to the ventilator and telling the ventilator that here is your controller signal. Now, to know that this catheter is really in place, we have used the heart as a lighthouse, because the heart is like the biggest artifact we have, so we thought we better take advantage of it. And what you have here is that you have a catheter. When it goes through, this is just an animation, but you see at the top, you can see a P wave and a QRS. At the bottom, you see that the P wave is disappearing and the QRS is getting weaker. And this is quite a typical illustration of what you see if you put the catheter inside the patient. And this tells us that we are at the heart with the upper part of the array, and we are passing in towards the abdomen with the lower part. That's what we get. And this is a nice way to verify that we just know. Because this was a big problem for a while, like how do we know the catheter is in place? Here you see again the phrenic nerve signal going down over the diaphragm. But now you see this little ball going back to the ventilator. Well, here we have the signal that was catched up. That's an electrical signal. And that just tells the ventilator time to deliver assist. And when the signal goes away, it says time to stop. Now, this is slow motion. Super, super, super slow motion. So if we go into a real situation, which this is, you actually have here an illustration where when the brain starts to get more yellow and the nerves get more yellow, there is more inspiratory effort. And you can see as there is more inspiratory effort, the chest wall actually moves. The lungs are increasing, the diaphragm is going down, and all this happens at the same time. This is like just milliseconds from the brain to the diaphragm. But also in this case, it's only like milliseconds or not even that for the signal to go from the ventilator, from the patient's diaphragm to the ventilator. And the processing time in the ventilator is just processing time is in the microsecond range. Some pneumatics needs milliseconds in order to react. So what you have here is a kind of a system that when the brain says, I'm starting to breathe now, here we are. The ventilator says, okay, fine, I'm going to give you some assist. I'm increasing my effort because every breath you do starts with nothing and goes to maximum. As I go from nothing to maximum, the ventilator will increase the assist. So it will say, okay, you're just doing a little effort, you get little assist. Oh, it's going up, here you get some more. And it does that in every breath, all the time. You can see here too on the thing here, that we have this array of electrodes. And this is like an array of 8 electrode pairs actually. And we need that to cover the motion, the range of motion of the muscle, and it also makes it easier for you to position. And here you can see the mode as an animation. This is like really what it does. At the bottom part you see the diaphragm activity. At the top part you see the airway pressure. And you can see that as the diaphragm activity goes up, the pressure goes up too. When we come to the end of inspiration, we go back to PEEP. We have no assist during exhalation. There is only PEEP. And you can see here was a bigger breath. So you got a bigger effort and you got more assist, which helped you to increase your volume and flow. So this mode is interacting with you within every breath and between breaths. I'm not going to go deeply on the processing part because that will take the rest of the day, but the general concept is that we take out a signal and you see those 8 channels of kind of black cluster at the top there. That's diaphragm activity as it comes out from the electrode. On top of it, you see the transdiaphragmatic pressure. That's the pressure that is generated when a person is breathing, in this case, from functional residual capacity to maximal inspiration. And you could probably tell that there is getting a little bit more activity towards the end of the inspiration there, but it's not so easy to see. In order to use this signal, we have to take away artifacts. And I'm not going to go through how we do it, but we do it. We also have to detect where the diaphragm is because it moves. And the electrode moves, the esophagus moves, everything moves. So we have to know where on this catheter we are at all times. Finally, we have a process signal. And now you can start to see that there is actually some increase throughout that inspiration. So to go from starting from like an inspiration to maximal inspiratory capacity, you see there is an increase in that kind of activity there. Now, if we process this signal, we get actually even more stable signal. You can see something here, and we have some small artifacts we can detect and remove here, but here we place the waveform over it, and this is really what we're looking at. This is going from baseline, which means that the diaphragm is not doing anything, to actually the highest activity that you can get out of a diaphragm because this is an inspiratory capacity maneuver. So you can see here that how you're breathing in, how your effort is increasing, and this is the output you get. This is linked to the ventilator and used to control the assist. Now, how fast is this going? Well, we use 16 milliseconds to calculate each decision. A typical knee-jerk reflex is 50 milliseconds. So we take 4 decisions in that time. So this is a monosynaptic stretch reflex. This is one of the fastest reflexes we have. So you can imagine that new technology can make us drive really fast. Now, the size thing. We have big patients, we have neonatal. I mean, we go from, say, 500 grams up to, I think the biggest guy we had was 150 kilos. I think it's actually on this slide there, yeah. So you see here we have to change the sizes of these catheters. So you see on the right side, you see there is like small pictures there, and that's going from 16 French at the top to 5 French at the bottom. And in the bottom, you see a rat signal, actually. You see that little signal at the very bottom there. That's from a rat. You see the neonate signal. That's big. Now, the mode in action is, you see the upper part here, the diaphragm activity. You see it goes from low activity to high activity. This is a patient. This is the way he's doing. He had a suction a little while before. He was pretty aggravated. He went up and down in his breathing, and he was like really not happy with what happened to him. And you can see here, in this case, the pressure is following. And coming back to this later again, but the thing with one level assist is, where do you set the level of assist here? You have to cover the peaks. You can't cover the bottom. That means that every time you set it to cover the peak, you are going to over-assist the patient all the time except when he is agitated. Because if you put it too low, I mean, you're going to have to go and increase it, but if this only lasts for, say, 1 minute, 2 minutes, then you would have to go and turn it down again 2 minutes later. How much running is this? I mean, I guess you have many patients to take care of. So now we're going into a little bit of a more complicated area here. This is how to adjust a level of assist, because the patient is in control. You cannot control the pressure he's taking. You cannot control the volume he's taking. You cannot control the respiratory rate he's going to choose. So to make it like a little bit complicated, I put this graph together, but it's actually not so complicated. You see here at the top the neural respiratory output from the brain. That's the signal we talked about. It goes down to diaphragm electrical activity, and Lorenko showed that this is more or less the same signal. What is interesting now is that your respiratory muscles going down this way receives the same information as the ventilator is receiving at the same time. So the pleural pressure that you make is, you can say it's the same thing as the diaphragm activity. I mean, that's the signal telling it to contract, times a efficiency constant. So if the muscle is weak, it can't generate very much pressure for that activity. So the activity might go up in order to generate more pressure, but if the patient is really sick, he cannot get so high. Now, the ventilator on the other side here has the diaphragm signal times another constant, which is like the NAVA level. This is where we boost him. We turn this knob and we give him more pressure for a given activity. So as he is getting weaker, you can turn this knob so he gets stronger. By just turning that knob, you help the patient to become stronger. And in fact, that's all you do to the patient. This is an artificial muscle that just helps you to breathe, nothing else. Now, the ventilated pressure times the pleural pressure is the transpulmonary pressure, and this is the pressure that will inflate your lung. This is the pressure that is sensed by all the receptors from the vagal system in your lungs going back to your brain. And also the load receptors that you have saying that this is really heavy are also responding through other afferents, but responding to the same transpulmonary pressure. So, to set the gain, it's pretty easy. You look here on the y-axis, you can see the ventilator-delivered pressure, and you see the diaphragm activity. So if we say that the diaphragm activity goes from 0 to 10, and we have a level of 1, it means the pressure will go from 0 to 10 in the breath. If we double the level, so we go to level 2, well, the same activity, 0 to 10, will go from 0 to 20. So you're just going to turn this factor up, and you get for a given activity at any point in the inspiration, more pressure. So it's not very difficult. But what can be a little bit complicated to understand is how do we respond to it? So if we look here on the left panel, you see on the upper part there, you see diaphragm activity, and it's very high. At the bottom, you see the assist, and this is a NAVA level of 1 with PEEP of 5. You can see the assist is low, the activity is high, so this guy needs some help. Now we increase the level 10 times to a NAVA level of 10, same level of PEEP, and what happens? Well, we didn't get a 10-fold increase in pressure. We only got a doubling of the pressure. Why? Because he only needed twice the pressure. For the rest of it, he said, thank you very much, and he sat down. This is like sitting, like riding in a wheelchair. He didn't have to work anymore. This is to put an extra engine on your bike. You don't have to pedal anymore. This is really what it does. So when you say I had enough, you lower your activity. So here we see. Oops, I was supposed to go to 7 here. So just to summarize this again here. So we are going back to a system where we are actually able to adjust the gain, and we're going to go into this graph now, and I'm going to go down here and click on this button. So here we are now from going from no assist, and we're turning the knob. And you can see here now that for every breath, there is a little bit of increase in pressure at the top. The volume goes up, the flow goes up, but you see the diaphragm activity goes down because you get assist, and as you get assist, you are reducing your drive because you get more pressure. But at some point in time, which is supposed to happen now, you will just continue to reduce your drive, but you will not take any more pressure because you say, I have the volume I want, I have the flow I want, I have the breathing frequency I want, I don't want anymore. And therefore you can stop. And you can continue to withdraw your diaphragm activity down to the noise level. You really can. And we haven't been able to get patients to, or healthy subjects in this case, to stop breathing or to hyperventilate. And what we can get at the very extreme is that it becomes more like a little bit of an erratic pattern. You take one breath, you get over-assisted, and then you take in the next breath, a small one to try to compensate. So you oscillate a little bit, but this is at extreme levels of assist. So go on a bit again. So to finalize my presentation, here we see the thing in action. So this is like actually our right hand here. This is the man who makes everything happen for us. And he's breathing here on the Cerebral prototype that we are using today in our lab. And you can see here the test lung that is there is inflating. He has the catheter down. The activity comes from his diaphragm. If you look at the test lung on the ventilator, you will see that his breaths are perfectly matched so that his activity is controlling the test lung, and you see the pressures that he's doing on the screen there, and that is as simple as this mode actually is when you use it. I don't say it's perfect, I don't say it's anything fantastic, but I think we have a few points we can take home from this, and that is, number one, if the electrode is positioned at the level of the diaphragm, there must be a signal when breathing. We have done over 100 healthy subjects. I can take any one of you here, put down the catheter. If you don't have diaphragm activity, you wouldn't be sitting here. If there's no diaphragm electrical activity and you still see ECG, you wouldn't be sitting here either, because you would be dead. Or the electrode would be broken. If there is no ECG, the electrode is out. Sorry, that's what I'm saying, yeah. So I said that one already. In presence of diaphragm electrical activity, though, the ventilator and the diaphragm receives the same signal, and thus the diaphragm and ventilator pressures are synchronously generated to inflate the lungs in response to neural inspiratory drive, and this is important. And the neural feedback will adjust the neural respiratory drive, both within the breath and between breaths, which in turn will adjust the ventilator pressure generated to inflate the lungs. And that's about it. This is my daughter's comment. When we flew over Greenland, only time I saw Greenland in daylight was, Papa, Greenland is not green. And we have a huge team we work with, and I just put the names here. So thank you very much.
Can we have a microphone? Some questions. There's one at the back and then one at the front here, and one over on the side.
Hi. Is there anyone in the United States reproducing this, or are you in cahoots with anybody in the United States, just not in Canada, because you know we have that FDA thing?
Who's reproducing it, you said?
Or is there anyone in the United States that's doing the same work?
No. I mean, this is the point. Today we are the only lab in the world who's been doing this for the last 10 years. And we are collaborating with a group in Montreal. We have some collaborations in Canada. Due to the, we have to get an IDE in the United States, and that's pretty complicated. So at this time, we have no collaboration in the United States running NAVA. No, we don't, no.
Question, can we have a microphone up here? And I think there was someone else on the side as well. Third row.
Great presentation, thank you. My question is regarding the diaphragmatic signal, electrical signal. How do you determine between that signal and the diaphragmatic fatigue that might be occurring?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? Between the...
my question is regarding the...
yeah, I heard it first. But how do you determine between what you said?
The diaphragmatic fatigue that might be happening.
Fatigue?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
my issue is about weaning process. If you're trying to...
Yeah, we have done, that's where we came from actually, looking into, we actually started off this whole journey on the point that we took each a little sample of 256 milliseconds, broke them down to 2048 points in the frequency domain, and tried to say, are we fatiguing or not, how many motor units are recruited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a good friend of mine who is an intensivist who said, like, I mean, why don't you take the whole package and just try to trigger a ventilator? That's where we started. But the point here is that fatigue is like what we try to avoid here. So like the signal in itself is a little bit affected by the fatigue. Actually, when it fatigues, if the muscle gets fatigued, that means its excitability goes down, and that means it slows the conduction velocity. It actually means that the signal becomes a little bit stronger, which actually adjusts the assist for you, so you actually get more assist in that case. So it goes in the right level. It doesn't take away the signal. If a patient is failing, I mean, if he stops breathing on this, I mean, then it wouldn't be due to fatigue, because then you have set the assist level too low. If you look at weaning, and we will come back to that this afternoon, the thing is here that we can titrate this assist a little bit, as what I showed here, because we can see when the patient seems to be satisfied, when he doesn't let the pressures go up anymore, the tidal volume doesn't go up, breathing frequency stabilizes. You can see that inflection point pretty nicely in a lot of patients, and you can use that as your target to set the patient. That level seems to not fatigue either animals or humans when we run them for anything between 3 hours to 24 hours. So I think the fatigue is not so much an issue here in this mode.
So the gain is independently controlled based on your diaphragmatic electrical activity.
Yeah. Well, if you say, like, I mean, if you increase your effort, you get more assist. If your NAVA level is too low, that means you don't get enough assist for your effort. I mean, you will slowly go towards failure. So you have to make sure that you give enough, that the level of assist is high enough. But you have a huge room here. I mean, you could say today, with pressure support, how do you set the assist? I mean, what I use is like, or what we hear is like, start with PEEP of 5 and pressure support of 5 or 10, and then we see where it takes us. And I think that's something that is commonly used. I think the only mode today that actually has a bit of an intelligent setup is PAV. They at least say that we have so much elastance and so much resistance, but they don't know how weak the muscle is. So they don't know how much, I mean, they can just unload, but they don't really know how much help the muscle actually needs. So in this case, we let the patient decide, and it seems that the feedback he gives to us, and I'll come back to that this afternoon, actually, in the other presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Person in the second row there.
Have you tried this on newborn or premature babies?
In
Newborns or premature?
Premature babies.
Yes, this has been applied in a trial in Sweden, I know, in newborns, not in, I don't think we have nothing in premature. Sylvia, help me there. 3 newborns, yeah. 3 kilos, yeah, yeah. So that's, in our lab we have we have a trial starting now in preterms, and Jennifer is going to present this afternoon also a previous trial where we measure the signals in preterm neonates. Yeah. And the experience we have there is rather challenging. It's not exactly what you would expect, but you will see that this afternoon. We have a lot of experience in rabbits and rats, and the size thing, as I say, the size here doesn't matter at all. It really is, it's not an issue. It's, you synchronize, if you have the activity and you measure it, you synchronize the ventilator, and you will provide assist in proportion to the effort. Now, if this is the right or wrong way to go, I think this might be depending on your patient, and this is something that, as Rolf said before today, that we have to really take that decision once we start doing this, because we can't take the decision before we have done it. We don't know what's going to happen in all cases. We have, like today, good experience, but still from research, which is extremely regulated, you can't get much work out. I mean, you get some 100 patients or something like that when you start to sell a product, but it's really you guys here who are going to be the true evaluators, and it's the feedback from you that will determine whether this mode is going to be useful or not, I think.
Up at the front, please. Right in the center. John?
Christer, not only nice presentation, but you're to be congratulated for pioneering this this idea. And it makes intuitive sense that if you can get the linkage correct, it's going to be a real advance. I have some real practical questions, though, that relate to the catheter. I noticed a couple of things that I'm wondering about. In our institution, we often have patients who, without our intending to, become agitated and pull out their tubes.
Yeah.
You know, they pull out their nasogastric tubes, or they dislodge it, or a nurse dislodges the tube, etc. Obviously, we've got to take precautions to make sure that this does not happen. My first question, could you respond to that?
Yes. As you're saying, like if the tube comes out, the signal is gone, correct? And this is something that we have today, like, looked into. So, I mean, if we go back to one of the first slides I showed you, like, I mean, we are pretty high up in this food chain, you know. So what we do, we just revert back to flow or pressure trigger. So we have, like, whatever you use today is our backup. So in that case, we have looked upon both in rabbits and in patients that a first come, first served kind of thing. So we try to combine the best of the two technologies. So what we have today, and as everybody knows, is that if there is not a high airway resistance in place, you can trust, like without dynamic hyperinflation, you can trust the flow signal really good to start the ventilator. Now, to stop the ventilator, that's the problem, because you can't trust the flow signal to stop the ventilator. It doesn't do it, because the influence of the ventilator itself is bigger than the influence of the patient a lot of times, and therefore you can't trust it to stop. This has been shown in many cases. And so from that point of view, I would say that if you don't trigger on the diaphragm activity, and it's a lot of times we don't, so we don't start maybe with diaphragm activity, but it will come. So you might start by using accessory muscles, rib cage, whatever. And a lot of COPD patients, for example, are just triggering the ventilator. They don't actually take a breath. They just, a little thing, and it's enough to start. So combined trigger to start, and we have a kind of a neural off-cycling, but it's again, it has a pressure limit to it too, so that what Bob was alluding to, that if the pressure goes up, well, if the pressure goes up too much, there will be a cutoff there too.
Yeah, the second part of the question, and I'll make this very quick. Obviously, the consistency with which you record the diaphragmatic strength signal is very important. And I may be missing something, but in the catheter that you showed, it goes into the stomach for tube feedings, for example. In clinical practices, I'm sure you know, feeding tubes are often put in and then advanced into the small intestine. And the catheter that you put in for NAVA would be, in that case, occupying a space that is also occupied by a second tube. So I'm wondering if there's any interference with the second tube with the NAVA feeding tube.
Well, first we have as I'm saying, the typical catheter we use today is the Levine type 1, and we are looking at even the post-pyloric feeding tubes too, because we can place the electrodes on any type of tube. This is not an issue. If you need to, say, put a post-pyloric tube today, you can take a very thin, very small catheter and go beside if you want. But we actually had in our ICU too, we had, usually the post-pyloric tubes are not so thick, so you have the 16 French and the other one at the same time. And we had, I think, at least 5 or 6 patients in our ICU that we ran the two beside each other. And this only problem is that if you have to reposition it, it might be a little bit complicated. But in that case, it's, as I'm saying, it's again for the future, new solutions and so on, but we manage as it is today.
Can I ask you, Christer, that you talked briefly, I mean, the key here, it seems to me, one of the key, the number of keys, but key here for this to work is that the timing is such that from the brain to the electrical signal being picked up, to the processing and to the generation of the pressure. Can you give us, at each stage, what is the time delay? You know, just to show us that in fact it is in fact short enough that it works the way it should work.
Yeah, I mean, if we take the every breath time delay, I think you have some, I don't know what if you stimulate the brain till you measure a signal at the diaphragm, I think we're talking about 10, 20 milliseconds. Okay. And
from then on?
Because
there's processing, you have to filter.
The electricity to travel in a wire, that's fast. So that's just milliseconds.
But the filtering takes, this is a delay.
The processing time for our filters, like, well, at least in our prototype version, we were using before on the ordinary, I don't know, Pentium something computer. I think the programmer said that we are about something like, it's a microsecond range though. So processing is absolutely no time. That's speed of light, I would say. The slowness comes when you come to the thing of the mechanics, like to open valves. I think it's, what is it today, 20, 30, 40 milliseconds, something in that range. So, I mean, we are from the start to the signal is pressure back to the system is still within the knee-jerk monosynaptic reflex. This goes extremely fast.
So the patient's getting the pressure signal delayed by a most about 25 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds, something like that.
Say 50, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, just a ballpark. Okay.
As I'm saying, still, this is like what would protect us if we make a fall or anything. This is the fastest we can do. I think that the rule of thumb is that you don't experience anything that is shorter than 100 milliseconds.
Yeah. One comment just before we go for lunch, because there's going to be lots of time for more questions, because there's going to be 3 other presentations. The last movie you showed with, that showed a subject with a catheter down, and there was basically a bag that was being filled. I think that's really instructive for people to think about. We talked this morning about non-invasive ventilation. We talked about air leaks. That system is an infinite air leak. Everything is going out of this bag, nothing into the patient, and yet you could still get synchrony. So I think in terms of potentially for non-invasive ventilation, this would be a very exciting approach theoretically, and I think Jennifer has some data on this. Very exciting approach, because you could get away from the issue of leaks completely. The only issue there, of course, is putting the catheter down. But just think of that, that's an infinite leak. The ventilator, nothing's getting into the patient, and yet the ventilator is able to follow the patient breathing. So there's going to be lots of time for questions afterwards. We're starting lunch a little bit early, and I think that's good, because Christer said his next talk is actually a little longer than this one. So let's try to come back here at 1 if possible, rather than 1:15.